Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Nerd Corner. I am your lovely host, Philip, and in today's episode, we are continuing our lovely Star Wars series this month, as it is May, and it is May the 4th, and just the whole month is Star Wars, according to me, obviously. I could care less what you guys think, but for me, the whole month of May is Star Wars themed. So, yes, we are going to be discussing one of my absolutely favorite films and something that I had the pleasure of seeing in theaters relatively recently because of their 20th anniversary, and that is Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. So, when I tell you how happy and emotional I was seeing this in theaters, is a total and complete understatement. I mean, again, I didn't have the privilege of seeing this movie when it came out in 2005. So, being such a big fan of Star Wars, loving this movie, and then being able to see it on the big screen was just absolutely phenomenal. And it made my entire day. Um, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into it today and just kind of discuss, a little bit about like, the scores and, obviously we all know the people that are in it, and then just kind of go over some of the pros and cons. You know how we do it on this channel. But yes, if you guys are watching this, that means that you've already checked out the Tales of the Underworld review that I did. So if you haven't, I will post it towards the end of this episode for you guys to go back and watch. But please go check that out. And yeah, I hope you guys are all having a great month so far. You're having a great day whenever you're watching this. I am recording some of these episodes on the same day. So if it looks fairly similar, that's exactly why. But hopefully everybody's having a good day. Everybody is doing well. They are healthy. And they are ready to sit down, relax, and enjoy as I sit and I talk about one of my favorite movies of all time. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about Revenge of the Sith today. So, this movie was released back on May 19th in 2005. So, technically, the 20th anniversary is not for another 13 days at the time of that I'm recording this. But it came out in 2005. It was directed by George Lucas, obviously, the man who gave us Star Wars and the Star Wars universe. Let's see. We're gonna go over some of the scores real quick. I will be clicking on the Rotten Tomatoes one because I want to see what the audience has given it over the years. So according to IMDb, this movie was given a 7.6 out of 10, which is a pretty average score. We're almost looking at kind of like a C plus B. Keep in mind, these are probably scores that came out in like 2005. So obviously not everybody had the same appreciation for this movie back then than they do now. So if this movie maybe came out today, maybe these scores would be a little different. Maybe they'd be the same, but just kind of keep that in mind. Rotten Tomatoes, it has given it a certified fresh score of 79%. And the audience is, I don't know if this is on purpose, or if this is just a huge coincidence, but people have given this movie for the popcorn meter a 66%. That just, if I'm being totally honest, that probably just has to be Star Wars fans trolling, and they're like, we have to put this at 66, which is great. I love how they thought of that. That is awesome. So, and then for Metacritic, we see it being given a 68 out of 100. Oh, excuse me. So overall, it's been given pretty average scores, definitely above average for sure. Like I said, we're kind of floating around that like C plus, B minus rating, which for a Star Wars movie, and coming out in 2005 is not horrible. I mean, it definitely is the strongest one out of the prequel trilogy for sure. According to the ratings and everything. And like I said, comparing this movie to 2005 to 20 years later in 2025, there's a totally different reception about it, and it's just gained a whole new meaning over the 20 years that it's been out. So again, overall, scores are fairly good. Obviously, we all know the cast, that we know and love. We have Hayden Christensen playing Anakin Skywalker. We have Natalie Portman playing Padme, Ewan McGregor playing Obi-Wan Kenobi, Samuel L. Jackson playing Mace Windu, and the list will go on and on, obviously. We're going to have Ian McDiarmid, playing Chancellor Palpatine, of course. We got Jimmy Smits playing Senator Bail Organa, Frank Oz playing Yoda, Anthony Daniels, C-3PO, Christopher Lee, Count Dooku, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So obviously, very star-studded cast. A lot of familiar faces, whether it's from the original Star Wars trilogy, or the prequel trilogy. And yeah, I mean, obviously, some familiar faces. We've seen them again in other Star Wars projects. And obviously, some have gained a much higher and a more respectable notoriety, like Hayden Christensen, Ewan McGregor, Ian McDiarmid, than they probably received in 2005. Again, especially Hayden Christensen for sure has probably been the biggest one that has received the most love and support from the fans over these last 20 years. So now that we got all the boring stuff out of the way, we're going to go into some of the pros and cons. So, if I'm rating this movie, obviously, I'm giving it a solid 9 out of 10. Yes, I mean, you might be asking, well, why isn't this a 10 out of 10 film if this is one of your favorite Star Wars movies? Because it's not exactly perfect, and we'll go into a couple of reasons why it's not perfect. And watching it again 20 years later has made some of those negative issues or those cons kind of come to light a little bit more, but at the same time it's also highlighted what I know and love about this movie and why I love it so much. So we're going to start with the cons, obviously, so we could end this lovely episode on a high note like we always do. So a couple of the cons that people have found with this film throughout the years and recently is dialogue issues. So while the story is strong, some of the dialogue remains awkward and still what does it say? Stilted, particularly in Anakin and Padme's interaction. That is definitely true. I mean, for how in love, Anakin and Padme are and, their relationship and everything through the prequel trilogy and then into the Clone Wars, we don't really get too many scenes of them being strongly. We get one good scene of them, really showing that they're in love and they care about each other. But all the other scenes are kind of awkward. They're very argumentative. Kind of like a typical married couple. So, for, what we've seen like in the Clone Wars and then like Attack of the Clones and then just, what we picture their relationship to be, it wasn't reciprocated as well as it probably should have been. Again, do I think that that takes away from the movie? No, I mean, absolutely not. Because obviously we see that his fear and his anxiety is blinding him. So if they're having like an irrational conversation or if he's acting irrational, that's exactly why. Because he is trying to do everything in his power to make sure that she's safe and that she lives, and she can't really understand that. So you don't expect them to have like heartfelt conversations about it. They have two really good moments in the movie that really does showcase their relationship and their dynamic. So it's not the whole movie, but overall, I'm sure the movie would have been just as strong, and I think it would have definitely been a lot more emotional if like all the dialogue and the conversations that they had were very heartfelt and warming. Another con, whether or not you see it as such, is the overuse of CGI. So while visually impressive, some scenes rely too heavily on CGI, making certain moments feel artificial. This one I don't really necessarily agree with too much, just because of the fact that, again, it is Star Wars, it's the Star Wars universe, you're going to have space battles, you're going to have land battles, that it is way too impractical to think that you're going to be building all of these sets and these props and everything to to showcase that. I think the CGI is fairly well done. There are some moments where again it was still very early in CGI, so it wasn't exactly perfect. But the movie is visually stunning and it is very impressive, and they do the CGI extremely well in this film. So as I read this, I mean, unless you're just not a fan of CGI, I can understand why this would be a point of contention for you. But overall, I mean, I don't really think that the overuse of CGI kills the momentum of this movie at all. I mean, there are still scenes that happen in this movie that are just as tragic and make you feel a type of way, even though they're all CGI. I mean, the biggest example is probably, Order 66. We know all those scenes are not exactly practical and it's not actors. There probably are some moments that are CGI or very heavily CGI'd, but it's still just as devastating and sad to watch. So I wouldn't really necessarily agree with the overuse of CGI. I think it's a little bit of a stretch. Another con that people have brought up is Count Dooku's death. So his quick demise feels rushed and underwhelming, considering his importance in Attack of the Clones. This I could agree with like just a little bit. Um, Obviously, this movie is focusing on the final steps and the final moments of Anakin Skywalker's downfall to Darth Vader. Um, Obviously, Count Dooku is one of those. I mean, all of these Sith lords and dark side users that we've seen in the prequel trilogy, Darth Maul, General Grievous, Count Dooku, they all have a special meaning that relate to Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. Count Dooku represents the fallen Jedi aspects of Anakin Skywalker's transition into Darth Vader. Obviously, we see him in Attack of the Clones as he's very important in Attack of the Clones. He's also very important throughout the Clone Wars show. Um, while I agree, his death might have been a little too quick and maybe a little underwhelming. Um, it's hard to really understand like the con here, because his death, according to Darth Sidious and the Chancellor Palpatine, was necessary. He wanted to replace Count Dooku with Anakin, obviously as his apprentice. So obviously after Anakin defeats him in lightsaber combat, Darth Sidious has no more use for him and just wants to kill him. So his death, if anything, kind of shows the inner turmoil with Anakin and shows one of the first steps that he takes into kind of embracing the dark side and, falling down the path towards Darth Vader. Because, he should have taken Count Dooku hostage and as a prisoner, but obviously he let his emotions and feelings kind of cloud his judgment, obviously being coerced by Darth Sidious, which ultimately led him to be killed. It is a sad end to Count Dooku's character. Again, obviously watching him in Attack of the Clones and then the Clone Wars. He was an expert lightsaber duelist and tactician and leader, but his death was not without meaning. It's just one of the very small trickle effects that eventually turns Anakin into Darth Vader. So I don't really see his death as a con, unless you really love the character and you were just sad to see him go so fast. The way he did, then I could totally understand. But if not, I think this is just a little bit of a picky complaint, to be honest. Finally, the last con that we have on the list here is Padme's arc. So her character, once strong and independent, is being reduced to a passive figure whose death feels poorly executed. Yes and no. We definitely see that spark of independence and fierceness in The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, as well as throughout the Clone Wars. We do see that she does take a little bit more of a back burner in this movie. But if anything, the reason why she does that is that because she is supposed to be symbolizing like Anakin's attachment and emotional crutch. Yes, her death might feel poorly executed, but there's a reason for that. Again, her going to Mustafar and confronting Anakin is showing the level of love and emotional attachment that they have to each other. And again, it was because of that fierceness and independence that she wanted to go there herself and hear it from Anakin herself, and just instead of believing what Obi-Wan told her. And her death is basically the final nail in the coffin, as she truly sees who Anakin is, and the man that she loved and adored, for years, is no longer, the man that's before her. And, what's so tragic is that, Anakin fought so hard to try to protect Padme and, keep him and his family safe and happy. And he is the reason why all of that comes crashing down. He put in so much effort, he sacrificed so much to save Padme, and in the end, he's the one that killed her. So, no, I don't feel like her death is poorly executed. If anything, it is the final nail in the coffin for Anakin's transition into Darth Vader. Because at that point, his anger, his fear, his hatred is pouring through him, and not even one of his longest time friends and mentors, Obi-Wan Kenobi, can get through to him. And that's what just makes his story so heartbreaking, is that even after he's been mauled and maimed and he's being transformed into Darth Vader, he's still asking about Padme. You still see that his eyes are not fully filled with hate and anger. As there's still that hope that Padme's okay and that all this was for nothing, and all this was for something. And, when he finds out that she's dead, that was his final descent into Darth Vader, which is very tragic. And so a lot of these cons, are probably just a few particular like fan issues that people might have had a problem with, or just kind of like people like nitpicking the film or whatever. So a lot of these are definitely taken with a grain of salt. I could agree with the CGI and the dialogue issues for sure, but the other stuff is definitely more with a grain of salt. Now that we've gotten through all the cons, now we're going to go into a couple of the pros before we wrap up this episode and kind of go into my final thoughts, really. So obviously we have a couple of pros here in regards to the movie. So one of the pros here is emotional depth. So Anakin's fall to the dark side is tragic and compelling, making the film the most emotionally resonant of the prequels. This is absolutely true. Just seeing his downfall towards the dark side and becoming Darth Vader is just absolutely tragic. It's something that just literally rips your heart out, and just, I think I get emotional every single time I see him and Obi-Wan fight on Mustafar. Him getting emotional in the Jedi, council chambers, just the tears, and just, like what he's doing is wrong, but he's trying to remind himself that he's doing it for Padme. When you see how much the last couple of events of the film are eating away at him, because he is constantly crying and he is so emotional that he has no idea what he's doing is wrong or right. But he just thinks he's doing whatever he can to save Padme. And it's the most heartbreaking and tragic downfall of a character in fiction, not just Star Wars, but in fiction. And it makes for beautiful storytelling. Obviously, another pro is epic lightsaber battles. So obviously the duel on Obi-Wan, the duel on Mustafar between Obi-Wan and Anakin is one of the most intense and visually stunning fights in Star Wars history, which is absolutely true. Obviously, Darth Sidious's rise, seeing how him orchestrating the events from the Phantom Menace all the way up until Revenge of the Sith, especially Ian McDermott's performance as Palpatine, is masterful, showing his manipulative genius as he orchestrates the downfall of the Jedi. Again, it just makes him a very interesting character as well, showing how, he has slowly been planting these seeds over time, and, with a little bit of nourishment and influence here and there, he basically has the galaxy in the palm of his hands. And, that was very interesting to watch as well, especially how he manipulates Anakin and leads to the downfall into Darth Vader. Finally, a pro of this movie is the dark tone that it represents. So obviously, unlike the previous two prequels, the film fully embraces a darker, more mature narrative, making it stand out, which is entirely true, because it focuses heavily on war and suffering and loss and hatred and death. And, again, this was a very dark point, towards the end of the Clone Wars, the fall of the Galactic Republic, the rise of the Galactic Empire. So it has a much more, even though it is PG-13, it has a much more mature narrative, and people have made hour-long YouTube videos just going into the tones and the themes of this movie in particular and how much it really means in the Star Wars universe. And this movie definitely puts the prequel trilogy and the prequel era on the map, and showing how everything that we've seen, from the Phantom Menace to the Clone Wars to Attack of the Clones, to all these series in between, how all this suffering and this death and this political turmoil and stuff was for absolutely nothing, because it was just orchestrated by one man to achieve one goal. And that is the most heartbreaking aspect of it. As you fall in love with these characters, you learn about them, you follow them, and then to know that this is all just one elaborate ruse for one man's gain it's absolutely stunning, and it's amazing storytelling, and it's tragic, and that's what makes you fall in love with the prequels, and what makes you fall in love with this movie in particular. So with that being said, like I said, with my final thoughts on this movie, looking at it 20 years later, the love for this movie is still here. I absolutely adore it. I felt like a little kid when I was in the theater going to see this movie again. It was absolutely phenomenal. Obviously being 20 years later, you are able to kind of see the pros and cons a little bit more, just because of the movie getting a little bit older. However, this movie means so much to me, and being able to see it in theaters and watch events that I've seen dozens of times, um, it just felt so much different. This movie is about tragedy. It's about loss. It's basically showcasing how far you would go for somebody that you love and somebody that you care about, and blurring the lines between right and wrong, and figuring out what the best course of action is. And we see that at the end of the day, Anakin was not a bad person by nature. He just cared about the people that he loved. His mother, his friends, his Padawan, his clones, his wife. This was just a man trying to figure out how to escape more loss and trauma in his life and hold on to the people he, has dear that are dear to him. And unfortunately, his efforts were their downfall. And that's what's so tragic about it, is that even to this day, in real life, people let their fears and anxieties, I'm no better, people let their fears and anxieties cloud their judgment and make them do things that, they normally wouldn't do, but they think that that's what they have to do because it's in their best interest. And it is very tragic, especially when you realize that he's so young. Like, he's only, like, in his 20s in this movie. And, it's heartbreaking, especially when you watch the Clone Wars, you watch the other prequel movies, and you fall in love with this character, and you fall in love, but at the same time, your heart is ripping, because every single episode that you watch, every single movie that you watch, that you're just getting closer to his eventual downfall. And it is one of the most tragic things in cinema history, that you could fall in love with this character and love this character at the same time, knowing that this character is eventually going to turn into something much more horrible and completely different. It's astonishing how that works. And, that is what I took away from watching this film again in theaters. Like I said, regardless of the CGI or the awkward dialogue, in my heart, this movie is a 10 out of 10. It goes much deeper than the film. It's more personal than that. And I was very thankful to not only get a poster. I was able to get the 20th, just like I have the 25th anniversary poster for The Phantom Menace. I was able to get the 20th anniversary poster for Revenge of the Sith. Not only that, but being able to see it in theaters and relive a part of my childhood that I might have missed was one of the best moments of my life. And it reminded me why I'm a Star Wars fan and just who I am as a person today. And, it just meant a lot. And, I hope other people like me were able to go enjoy it in theaters and experience that as well. And I would love to hear anybody else's thoughts and opinions on, what Star Wars means to them and what this movie means to them, and, how it was seeing it in theaters. But before I start getting emotional and tearing up, that is going to do it for today's episode, as we unpacked and we discussed the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith and went over the movie as a whole. So if you guys enjoyed this, please check out my other Star Wars episodes as well. Like I said, this whole month is Star Wars themed, so please look out for those episodes. If you're wondering where you can find this lovely podcast and episodes like this, you can find me on Instagram as well as TikTok at The Nerd Corner, and you can find me on YouTube at The Nerd Corner as well. So just, give me a like, give me a follow, turn those notifications on to let you guys know when the episodes are posted. Thank you so much for coming out to another wonderful episode. I really hope you guys did enjoy it. Please leave your likes and your comments down below. Let me know what you guys think. And until the next time, I hope you guys continue to enjoy your month of May, whether you celebrate Star Wars the whole way through or not. And, please be safe. Do not do anything stupid. Have a great day, great afternoon, great evening. Please stay hydrated, all that good stuff. And I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye for now.